Of all the things in our galaxy, I think most of us can agree that the sun is pretty darn powerful. It's pretty crucial to life and could also very easily end all life in no time at all. So needless to say, a being who is the living manifestation of the sun would be pretty powerful, right? Well, that's exactly what Apollo is. Apollo first appeared in Doctor Strange Volume 2, number 22 in January of 1977 after she learned that the creators were plotting to replace stars in order to gain power. She created a human form and traveled to Earth to help Doctor Strange. She even saved the hero from an attack of the demon Visa Majoris, using her ability to produce blasts of heat that are equivalent to the power of the sun. So needless to say, she could probably absolutely destroy anyone who is less powerful than a literal star. But despite that, at the end of the story, she actually lost her power and her memory, but instead fell in love with humans, because apparently we're just that great. Despite being a member of the Avengers for quite some time, the superhero known as Jack of Hearts seems to be one that is often forgotten about. Jack Hart was the son of a brilliant scientist and on his mother's side an alien, with her being a member of the Contraxian race. While he gained some advantages from his mother's alien heritage, his father had created a ridiculously efficient liquid sci-fi fuel called Zero Fluid. Exposure to Zero Fluid is what forced his body to undergo mutation, allowing him to project powerful beams of concussive energy from his body. Unfortunately, this energy was also notoriously hard for Jack to control, which led to the character becoming a pretty tragic one, with a fairly checkered past while still ultimately being an incredibly good-hearted person. His passing and resurrection was featured prominently in Avengers Disassembled, and he did have a pretty prominent relationship with Jennifer Walters' She-Hulk, so hopefully if that show gets a second season, we will see his character finally show up in the MCU, giving the hero the attention he deserves from the mainstream. Being an Asgardian and the actual brother of Thor, it's actually incredibly unfair how Balder the Brave has never been able to garner much of a spotlight for himself. Balder the Brave is the Asgardian god of light, which obviously gives him light-based powers, but he is also often seen with speed-based powers as well, as he is the most agile of all the Asgardians. In Norse mythology, it's Balder's passing that is supposed to actually kick off Ragnarok. He plays an important role in the mythology and has played a role in quite a few Asgardian Marvel stories, but he's just never been able to reach the heights of popularity that his half-brother Thor and adopted brother Loki are able to generate. I mean, he hasn't even showed up in the MCU until he was only slightly mentioned in the second season of the Loki TV show, and even that mention only pointed out that Balder, Odin's son, never gets recognized. But funnily enough, Balder is not the only seemingly neglected Asgardian. While Asgardian heroes like Thor, the Warriors 3, Heimdall, Valkyrie, and even Loki get tons of time in the spotlight, others like Kel the Stormrider get all but lost to history. Kelda is the Norse goddess of winter storms, ice, lashing rain, and churning clouds, which sounds very much like a power set that would put her in league with Thor himself. She possesses all the powers of Asgardians that we expect, with enhanced attributes and abilities, and was even considered to be one of the higher ranking Asgardian gods, especially due to her gentle nature. Once she was resurrected by Thor after the Ragnarok cycle, she sought new experiences within Midgard and fell in love with her husband, Bill Cobb. Even though Kelda eventually bit the dust, her ghost still wasn't done fighting and even assisted Thor in the fighting against Kull Borsun. Next up, Jack Kirby introduced Machine Man in Marvel's 10-issue adaptation of 2001: A Space Odyssey. As X-51, he was created by Dr. Abel Stack, being his 51st attempt that actually succeeded in creating artificial life. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Stack then lost his own life in the process, leaving X-51 to wander the planet alone. It was later on that Marvel would introduce X-51 to the main Marvel universe as Machine Man. X-51, now assuming the identity of Aaron Stack, vowed to fulfill his creator's dream of human and robot coexistence. He became a fugitive from the military in a world fearful of machines. His encounters were honestly pretty dark sometimes too, with one of his first outings having him face off against an extremist, dismantling and reprogramming a malevolent computer, and navigating a society suspicious of artificial beings. Despite having many run-ins with the Avengers, even being a part of both the main team and the the West Coast Avengers, the character just never really got that much mainstream traction. Griffin Gogal was just an ordinary plumber with a smoking habit doing his ordinary job when an elderly psychologist couldn't afford to pay the plumbing bill. So instead, this psychologist offered to cure Griffin's smoking habit through hypnosis. The psychologist was actually an alien, and the hypnosis had the added benefit of unlocking Griffin's superhuman abilities, which are basically just the same abilities as Superman and the ability to perform any skill at a quote ultra level. With his new powers, he went out to try and find a new purpose, applying to be a part of a bunch of different teams. It was with the Avengers though where he got himself arrested and he ended up in prison and hasn't really been seen again since 2016, as far as I can tell. The original hero named 3D Man made his debut in Marvel Premiere number 35 in April of 1977 as test pilot Chuck Chandler, who was kidnapped by Skrulls. Chandler sabotaged a Skrull spacecraft and fled, but unfortunately Chuck's brother Hal arrived just in time wearing his sunglasses to see Chuck disappear in a flash of light as the Skrull craft exploded. In an incredibly weird twist of events though, it turned out that Chuck became a two-dimensional being imprinted on Hal's sunglasses. When Hal concentrated, he could now somehow release Chuck and they would merge together into a being with 3 times the strength, speed, and stamina of a regular person. As might not be a surprise to some, the character did eventually fade into obscurity. But then, Delroy Garrett Jr., a disgraced Olympic athlete who decided to turn to religion, became the second equally obscure 3D Man when he became the spokesperson for the Triune Understanding, a religious cult whose leader gave Delroy the powers of 3D Man. Miracle Man is a hero steeped in legal battles. Originally known as Marvel Man, this hero was created as a replacement for the original DC hero Captain Marvel, or Shazam, when publishers Len Miller and Sons, who held the rights to reprint Fawcett Publications' Captain Marvel stories in the UK, were denied the rights to the character by DC Comics. Eventually, Marvel Comics gained the right to the character with Neil Gaiman as a writer, and so Miracle Man was born. An orphan named Mike Moran became the Air Force's choice for the experimental Project Zarathustra. This project created a superhuman from alien DNA and, using a device, implanted it into Mike's own consciousness. Now, whenever Mike says the word Kimota, he becomes Miracle Man, gaining superhuman strength, speed, stamina, and longevity, as well as flight, invulnerability, energy manipulation, telepathy, telekinesis, and the ability to just get better over time in powers, and apparently in his stories too. Though he was created as basically a copy of the character Shazam, Miracle Man is arguably leagues and bounds more powerful, able to do almost anything with his powers, not to mention his stories are much more powerful and mature than those of Billy Batson. Kelsey Leigh Kirkland was a normal school teacher until she was caught on the front line of a battle between the Avengers and the Wrecking Crew. She used Captain America's shield to save her family and Captain America from a blow, causing her extensive injuries, but because of her bravery, she was reborn on Otherworld, where she was chosen by Brian Braddock, the original Captain Britain, to inherit the mantle and powers of Captain Britain. Wielding the Sword of Might and swearing to protect her homeland from evil, her time as Captain Britain was marked by a ruthless dedication to justice, and she battled adversaries like Morgan Le Fay and the Wrecking Crew. It was then that she realized that her heroic identity came with a huge consequence, being that if she revealed her true identity to her children, it would endanger their lives. Under the codename Lionheart, Kelsey sought out revenge against the former Captain Britain for what had happened to her, and in the end, she learned the error of her ways and let go of the mantle to be a mother to her children once again. The iconic Marvel sidekick Rick Jones is a staple of the Marvel Universe. He is most notably the close friend of Bruce Banner, and kind of the whole reason that Bruce even became the Hulk. Rick's biggest claim to fame is being the guy Bruce had to go and save from the Gamma explosion, which then gave Bruce his smashing persona. But the thing that people don't really know is that Rick got his own Hulk-like persona, and he named himself A-Bomb. After being exposed to a weapon powered by gamma radiation designed for use against the Hulk, Jones was mutated by intelligentsia into hulking out into a form similar to the Abomination. Jones's skin takes on a scaly sort of appearance, his eyes change color, and his hair just disappears. He gains an extra 4 feet and 1,800 pounds, and now, as a Hulk, Rick actually sets himself apart not just in his appearance, but even with gaining an extra power to camouflage himself at will, blending into the background. He was actually pretty important to a few stories, but eventually found himself cured of radiation by Doc Green, which took away his hulking out ability.
There are X-Men, the Justice League, the Avengers, the Titans,
and then there's everybody else. Back in 2009, Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four takes a little trip to the inhuman city of Atalan, searching for the Infinity Gems. The massive teleporting inhuman bulldog Lockjaw happens to stumble on the Mind Gem and is granted telepathy. Using this telepathy to read Mr. Fantastic's mind, he decides to use his other power to go and round up the other gems. Along the way, Lockjaw runs into Hairball the cat belonging to Speedball, the dragon Lockheed, the companion of Kitty Pryde, Redwing, Falcon's pet Falcon, Throg, a frog with the powers of Thor, Zabu, the saber-toothed tiger ally of the Savage Lands Khazar, and Miss Lion, May Parker's dog. Despite the fact that this team are literally just super pets, they decide to team up as the Pet Avengers, and they go off to assemble the Infinity Gems as part of a 4-part limited series. A more recent Earth 616 version of the team from 2021 consisted of Lockjaw, Throg, and Lockheed still, but this time accompanied by Doctor Strange's ghost dog Bats, and Hugin and Munin, the Ravens of Thor, formerly belonging to Odin.
This X-Men team and roster, the Extreme X-Men, marked the return of Chris Claremont to the X-Men in a full-time capacity. Extreme X-Men Volume 1 is a series that started in 2001 and ran until 2004. It was a team that featured my girl Rogue as leader, who is soon going to be the leader of the X-Men again, or a X-Men team, which you know, I'm all about because I love Rogue. The original Extreme X-Men roster features Beast, Psylocke, Bishop, Storm, Sage, and Thunderbird. Lifeguard, Gambit, and Slipstream were also added into the mix throughout the series. This team was originally brought together to find Destiny's premonition-filled diaries, but of course along the way was distracted by many other imminent threats, as happens when you're an X-Men team.
There have been several incarnations of the Outsiders in DC Comics, and most have been Batman or Batman family related, with one team even being led by Nightwing. The first ever version of the team came in 1983 after Batman gained a rather uncomfortable standing with the Justice League. The team had some notable moments, particularly because of its new characters like Katana and Geoforce. Batman and the Justice League would patch things up, and so he left the team to continue operating without him. During that time, they were operating in Markovia in order to receive funding and then moved to Los Angeles before they reunited with Batman and gained access to a Los Angeles Batcave. The last version of the team came following Batman Rip in 2008, where Alfred put together the team with each member representing a part of Batman's legacy, but obviously Batman actually never really bites the dust permanently, so that didn't really last.
Cape Sync is a superhero team, or really a superhero agency I guess I should say, from the same world as Invincible. In fact, as early on as issue number 8 of the Invincible series, you can see some of their members featured in the background. Not only that, but they also ended up getting their own spin-off comic as well. Although I believe it only lasted 3 issues total. It was a miniseries. You know, that's how it goes sometimes. Though there were Cape Sync backup stories I believe in certain issues of Invincible as well, so if you really like it you can also check those out, which also told the team's story. The miniseries centered initially around Bolt, who welcomes a new recruit to the team as his partner. The team is more like a business and kind of seems to operate kind of like a superpowered police station or a police office. People even get paid and everything. Kid Thor is the new kid in town who joins up with Bolt. Bolt, we learn initially wanted his name to be Black Samson, but obviously that name was already taken by the Guardians of the Globe members, so alas, it was unavailable when he joined up with Cape Sync, and that's why he's Bolt.
The team known as Force Works was formed by Iron Man, who had left the Avengers due to a dispute as to the role of superhumans. Force Works maintained the outlook that rather than being a reactionary force, they should try to preempt both natural and man-made disasters. The team was initially composed of Iron Man, US Agent, Spider-Woman, Julian Carpenter, Scarlet Witch, and Wonder Man, which in my opinion is such an interesting group of heroes. But by the end of their first mission, Wonder Man was thought to be deceased at the hands of the invading Kree, and shortly after the alien Sentry took his place, only to be completely forgotten when the team disbanded. The team fought in several skirmishes, but really only lasted about 2 years. The characters were mainly reabsorbed into the ranks of the Avengers afterwards.
I like to refer to this next one as the other XSE team. This team also spiraled out of a team that we talked about previously on this list, Extreme X-Men. XSE here stands for the Extreme Sanctum sanctions executive. Similar to the original XSE that Bishop was a part of in the future, or in his future, this team is also like a military police force, meant to maintain and in some cases enforce peace is kept between mutants and humans. Storm was asked to create the team by the United Nations and eventually would increase its numbers by recruiting the rest of her X-Men, making this another government-sanctioned mutant team, like X-Factor was originally. Team members have included Bishop, Cannonball, Magma, Rachel Summers, Psylocke, Rogue, Sage, Wolverine, X-23, and Gambit. Now that's a team.
Look, even though the book was cancelled in 1978 after a mere 17 issues, and many people, including the heroes on the team, look at it as an embarrassment, the Champions roster is actually pretty darn capable. With a team of 2 founding X-Men, Iceman and Angel, combined with heavy hitters Hercules, the Spirit of Vengeance Ghost Rider, and being led by Natasha Romanoff Black Widow, the Champions were aptly named and could kick some serious butt when given the opportunity. The team fought familiar villains like Titanium Man and the Griffin, but even began to develop their own rogues gallery with new villains such as Rampage and Swarm, and they even got an addition to the team in the form of Black Goliath before the book was cancelled. The team was intended to reform in 2007, only they were forced to rename as The Order since Marvel had lost the trademark for the Champions over the years.
You've heard of Green Lanterns, maybe you've even heard of Yellow Lanterns or Red Lanterns or even Black Lanterns, but how about Blue Lanterns? Yeah, that's a color too. Blue Lanterns have only made a few appearances in the new continuity, and even before that, during the New Earth days of DC, they weren't necessarily the most frequent to appear. Mainly, I feel like people just know Green Lanterns, whose color of course represents willpower. To be a Green Lantern, you must be strong in will. So, what's blue about? What's the whole blue thing? To be a Blue Lantern, you must be full of hope. So beautiful. I feel like I could be a Blue Lantern, honestly. If Green Lanterns are like the intergalactic police, Blue Lanterns are like therapists or peacekeepers or priests maybe. They have long been allies to the Green Lanterns, and their powers actually provide a boost to fellow Green Lanterns when they're nearby. Pretty cute. This is because their whole focus is of course on belief and hope, having faith in those around them. As such, many of their names start with a title like Saint, Sister, or Brother. I'd definitely be Sister. Sister Amanda, Blue Lantern. Sister McKnight.
Kind of like the Champions, DC's Detroit League is another team that gets a real bad rap, but actually has a pretty stacked roster when you take a closer inspection. After Aquaman, a charter member of the original Justice League, decided that the Justice League members were too interested in their own individual problems to be part of an effective team, he used his position to disband the team and establish the Detroit League. This new team, with half old-timers and half newbies, was largely used to add some diversity to the DC heroic lineup. Whether it achieved that or not is up to the reader. Made up of League mainstays like Martian Manhunter, Aquaman, Zatanna, and Elongated Man, along with newbies like Vibe, Gypsy, Vixen, and Commander Steel, it's often considered the worst roster of the team, but if you actually look at the roster and do some critical thinking, you'll find that it's very powerful indeed. Martian Manhunter and Zatanna alone are absolute powerhouses. Despite the jokes, Aquaman or even Commander Steel both make really effective tanks, and the rest of the team is quite capable in a variation of different situations.
The God Squad is about as powerful as they sound, but they still remain one of the lesser known teams in the Marvel Universe. The team was originally assembled by the Council of Godheads, and first came together during the events of Secret Invasion. The team first formed in the Incredible Hercules issue number 117 in 2008. The original roster included Adam the Demogorge, Snowbird, the Eternal Ajax, and Amatsu Mikaboshi, later known as, of course, the Chaos King. The roster would go on to include such impressive members as Silver Surfer, Galactus, Circe, Thor, Amadeus Cho, and of course, Hercules himself.
Street level heroes are often overlooked, but some of them can bring even the biggest threats to their knees. Moon Knight, for example. Moon Knight is a reliable and diligent hero when it comes to protecting the innocent people traveling the streets at night. While Moon Knight more often than not explores the traumatized complexity of Mark Spector's dissociative identity disorder, making him one of Marvel's grittier street level heroes, the origin of his powers as the first and high priest of the Egyptian moon god Khonshu make him actually an incredibly powerful supernatural hero as well. While we typically see him facing off against thugs or mercenaries from his past, we also see him face off against vampires, hell lords, Avengers level threats, and even single-handedly bringing some of the most powerful Avengers to their knees. Despite that, some of his best comic book moments are truly on the streets and come in Jeff Lemire and Greg Smallwood's run on the character, so definitely check that out if you have the opportunity. But speaking of Moon Knight, more recently Mark Spector actually found himself in the grave, and his mantle was taken up by Maximilian Coleridge, formerly known as Shroud. Max lost both of his parents right in front of him at the age of 10 years old, leading him to dedicate his life to combating crime. But unlike most heroes, Max actually went to law school, while also training as an Olympic level athlete and studying science. It was after graduating that he got really weird. Max joined the mysterious cult of Kali, where he became a master in a whole bunch of Asian martial arts and infiltration, but he also worshipped their dark goddess, Kali. When he had completed his training, Max was surprise branded with the Kiss of Kali, using a red-hot iron on his eyes, completely blinding him. But after the pain subsided, Max found that he had been granted a psychic perception that allowed him to see his environment within a radius of about 100 feet of him, even through solid walls. He would go into battle with his sanity, but got even more powerful as he gained Dark Force powers. As Moon Knight though, he's somehow even edgier than Mark Spector was, and he looks so cool. Now, despite Hawkeye, Clint Barton, being one of the Avengers and an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., he has a strong reputation in the source material as a street-level hero at times, with adventures that have made for some of Marvel's more personal stories, especially with writers like Matt Fraction, who made the character's probably greatest run. It tells an intimate story of how Clint Barton lives his life when he isn't really in the glamour of Avengers-level status. He's a guy with a bow and arrow, an extremely dangerous guy, but you put him next to an Asgardian god or a Hulk, and yeah, he doesn't look that impressive. There's a reason he is on the Avengers, and it's because Clint Barton is extremely capable. Watch him take out a room of guys by himself, and you'll see what I mean. Dick Grayson was not only the very first member of the Bat family, but for a lot of people, including me, he is the favorite. Born to a family of acrobats, orphaned, and then taken in by Bruce Wayne, Dick became the very first Robin, appearing in Detective Comics number 38 in 1940. He was the leader of the Teen Titans, and when his Robin career came to an end, he became Nightwing. He has gone on to take the Batman mantle a bunch of times, but honestly, it was in 1995 and 1996 when he received his own stories that he really became his own. He was given his own city, the decaying harbor town known as Bloodhaven, which was just north of, and honestly a bit more ruthless than, Gotham itself. It allowed him to be close enough to Gotham to stay part of the Bat family, as well as have his own city and series of adventures that, alongside his time on and leading various different teams, shows just how capable this former Robin really is. But speaking of former Robins, Dick Grayson's replacement as Robin was one Jason Todd. But while Nightwing became a pillar of the superhero community, Jason's journey was much darker. After his infamous passing at the hands of the Joker, Jason Todd was taken by Talia al Ghul to the Lazarus Pits, where he was not only resurrected, but also gained magical enhancements like the ability to summon the All Blades. Jason would then have his training from Batman built upon by being trained by the All Cast and the League of Assassins, before eventually leaving that group and returning to Gotham as the vigilante Red Hood. As Red Hood, he was incredibly complex and incredibly capable. He would fight Batman many times, having an on-again, off-again friendship with his former mentor, but also leading the Outlaws for a long time, and even leading the League of Assassins for a little while. He's considered one of the greatest Bat family members and one of the greatest hand-to-hand fighters out there. Even Damian Wayne, who doesn't even like Jason that much, admitted that he was one of the greatest fighters to have ever lived. After the passing of her mother, a warrior named Azumi Ozawa, Marvel's Colleen Wing moved to Japan and was trained as a samurai by her grandfather, Kenji Ozawa. Colleen took quickly to her samurai training, which eventually elevated her to become a world-class fighter, being incredibly efficient with her swords, but also in time as a master detective. After she had completed her training, Colleen moved back to New York City, where she used her abilities to work with her father, Professor Lee Wing, and as a private investigator, which led her to working with other local street-level heroes, and even teams like the X-Men and the Defenders. Over the years, she has co-owned Nightwing Restorations and Daughters of the Dragon with Misty Knight, and plays important roles with all different versions of Heroes for Hire as one of the most dangerous people on the planet in Marvel Comics. With the resources of a Tony Stark playboy, access to the mystical realms, and knowledge on the same class as Doctor Strange, Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, is a character that doesn't always seem like he would be duking it out with gangsters and street thugs. Iron Fist doesn't let his privileges and absolutely massive skill set stop him from getting involved in the local communities that he cares deeply for. He's done a lot of good work for the streets of New York City alongside his best friend Luke Cage. Those who earn the Iron Fist title by defeating the ancient dragon Shao Lao the Undying are trained to be living weapons. And for Danny, he recently gained access to the knowledge, experience, and skills of all the Iron Fists before him, so imagine how powerful he is now. And that's before even talking about his chi augmentation and the things he can do with his chi power, making him a force that very few can stand against. John Paul Valley was an agent of the Sacred Order of Saint Dumas. This secret and sacred order created a hero and protector of their secrets known as Azrael. This hero was actually a legacy title, with generation after generation being brainwashed and pretty much manipulated from before birth to believe that they were the Angel of Death. John Paul broke this conditioning when he decided to ally himself with Batman after Bruce Wayne had taught him the error of his ways. John Paul has gone on to be Batman for an infamous period of time, and he remained a vigilante for the most part afterwards. His skills were honed by training with Bruce Wayne, obviously, and he is thus possibly just as skilled as Batman, although his lack of experience and finesse make him the weaker of the two. But due to his extreme physical capabilities as a result of genetic engineering, he has greater strength, reflexes, and speed than a normal peak level human being, which in junction with his trained skills has allowed him to defeat the likes of Batman, Bane, Nightwing, and even be offered leadership in the League of Assassins by Ra's al Ghul. Second to last today, the original hero known as Thunderstrike was a guy named Eric Masterson. He eventually merged with Thor in the late 80s before fully taking up the mantle of Thor in the early 90s, and then eventually getting his own hammer and becoming Thunderstrike. Eric had a son, Kevin Masterson, but unfortunately due to his dad being increasingly involved with Thor, Eric began to lack in the father department, and so Kevin went to live with his mom and stepdad. Now eventually, Eric passed away after being possessed by the Blood Axe. His Thunderstrike mace was then taken by the Avengers and eventually given to Eric by Captain America himself. Given the Asgardian nature of his superhero origins, Thunderstrike isn't strictly a street level hero, but he feels very street level and is often listed as a street level hero. But Kevin has also been part of the Asgardians of the Galaxy and teamed up with the mighty Avengers. But last up today, Shang-Chi is one of, if not the greatest martial artists on Earth. He can take on multiple opponents at once and can even defeat people much more superhumanly powerful than him while he's just a regular dude. In fact, in the White Hot Room when the Phoenix organized a tournament to pick who would be the new Phoenix host, the only reason that Shang-Chi lost was because he refused to take a life. He's particularly skilled in Chinese martial arts, but his skill branches out to many more. Shang-Chi, like Iron Fist, is also able to manipulate chi energy, which he can use to enhance his strength and durability, and can even detect others based on their energy. But Shang-Chi gets a much more significant boost to power when he is using the 10 rings. He can use the rings as projectiles, manipulate their size, and use them to levitate and even fly. And he can even manipulate the energies from the rings to do many more things, including projecting said energy and creating an energy-based blast. Thanks to either side of his parentage, Shang-Chi inherited his mother's psionic abilities to communicate with his blood relatives, even the deceased ones.
The X-Men are generally thought of as one of Marvel's greatest superhero teams, but even they struggle sometimes in conflicts with other supes. When it comes to the Hulk, there was a time where he ended up humbling the X-Men. Now this was during World War Hulk. Hulk blamed a group of people for sending him to space known as the Illuminati. The Illuminati are their own secret group made up of a bunch of guys who basically consider themselves to be among the elite when it comes to the smartest people on Earth. Not every genius hero has joined them though. In fact, some who were offered a place originally on the team were wise enough to decline that offer. And when I say wise, I kinda mean it, as this is the team who ultimately did decide to send Hulk to space because he was considered too much of a danger on Earth. Hulk is sent away but returns to Earth for revenge due to the spaceship that he landed in exploding, destroying the new place that he had come to call his home. You may recognize its name, Sakaar. One person who he blames is an Illuminati member, Charles Xavier, though Charles was not actually at the meeting when it was decided to send Hulk away. When Hulk comes a-calling on the X-Men, he manages to beat them pretty badly. Fortunately, they are able to kind of shame him with some words into just like stopping his rampage here. Still safe to say that the X-Men would struggle in a fight against someone as powerful as the Hulk. If you had to say anyone that you feel like would struggle in a fight against the Hulk, who do you think that would be? If the Hulk can take on, you know, most of the X-Men. Pretty impressive. Spider-Man is a hero who ended up besting the X-Men when two of them were possessed by the Phoenix Force. Yep, you heard that right, the Phoenix Force. How did he do it? Well, actually not with his fists, but with his wits. Spider-Man was actually just squaring off with them to give the Avengers some time to retreat, but he managed to do one better after he manipulated Magic and Colossus, sister and brother, into turning on one another. Tony at least has tried to humble the X-Men. Now, he wasn't as successful as some others that are on our list, but he did try to do so by comparing kind of hands with them. Not a great move on his part, to be honest. This all went down during the first Civil War when he had a chat with Emma Frost, one of his ex-flames to be honest. He attempted to compare the Avengers to the X-Men, saying that they also had to deal with prejudice too. However, while he did attempt to humble Emma into backing down, this ultimately backfired, causing her to remind him of just how much hate and prejudice mutants had to deal with, including, you know, things like the catastrophic events that happened on Genosha. Don't think the Avengers have ever had that level of hate thrown against them, you know what I mean? While the covers for the Fantastic Four versus the X-Men comic from the 80s would leave you believing that the FF were the ones who were very much bested here, in the end they were actually the ones who kinda got the last laugh, with the little Franklin Richards joining forces with Lockheed and actually flying in and pretty much shaming everyone in the end with the state of Kitty Pryde, who was actually not doing so well at this time, and I believe it's kind of at the center of this conflict. I just love Franklin flying in and basically being like, are you guys really fighting right now? Like, Kitty is maybe about to die. Like, hello? Just a little, of course a little kid would just come in and be like, hey, everyone, let's just chill out. In this turn of events, Cyclops played right into Wade Wilson's hands. This was when Deadpool was given temporary membership to the X-Men. It turns out though that they had basically only offered Deadpool a place on the team, a temporary place on the team, because they wanted to keep a close eye on him, because yeah, they didn't trust him. While hurt by this revelation, Deadpool still did his best to play his part as an X-Men, regardless of whether or not his membership was considered to be real, by helping the mutants out. He even took the fall for them to help save their public image, and then in the end antagonized Psyche so that he'd fight an unmasked Deadpool while Wade was wearing his own unofficial X-Men costume. Once again to help them with PR. In the end, while he didn't want to, Cyclops was forced to admit that indeed, Deadpool did have moves. The Inhumans gave the mutants a run for their money sort of accidentally during IVX, Inhumans vs. X-Men. During this event, the Inhumans didn't really intend to hurt the X-Men, it was more of just a thing that like kinda happened here. This happened when the Inhumans' Terrigen clouds were released into Earth's atmosphere. They didn't know at the time, but it turned out that the Terrigen mists were actually really poisonous to mutants, even fatal. Cyclops early on actually died as a result of exposure, but Emma Frost, seeking to get revenge on the Inhumans, decided to make it seem as though Black Bolt had actually killed Cyclops during what could have ended up being peace talks had Emma not, you know, been manipulating this whole scenario. Instead, communication broke down and it ended up being an all-out war between the two sides, although eventually the mutants would realize that Emma had basically manipulated them into fighting this war against the Inhumans, and the X-Men and Inhumans would ultimately kind of team up to take down Emma. Black Panther managed to humble, or at least shame, one X-Men during the Ten of Swords event in the lead up to the Otherworld tournament. In the lead up to the tournament, both Arakko and Krakoa were basically given a list of champions, and each champion had a specific blade, a specific sword, you know, Ten of Swords, they had to recover to be able to enter this tournament. Storm's blade was located in Wakanda and was basically tied to the heritage and the lore of the people and the land. Storm went to Wakanda and asked for this blade, which was a super important item to them, but was told she would basically have to wait until Black Panther had returned because he was kind of the one that had to make that call. However, worrying that the delay would basically mean that she would miss the deadline to enter, and possibly not confident in maybe what Black Panther's answer would be, considering they have a romantic history, but it's also gone really bad before in the past, Storm instead decided to put her thief hat back on and just steal the weapon. Right after she'd acquired it and was kinda on her way out the door, Black Panther arrived back at the palace and basically confronted rejected her, not taking the blade back but basically condemning her for choosing to steal it in the first place and for her lack of faith in both him and in Wakanda. I love how the X-Men are constantly working to humble each other, like when Emma Frost decided to call Professor X out for how he treated and kind of manipulated Scott Summers over the years. She put a plant sort of in his mind and managed in essence to take control of his psyche to kind of torment him, but also to make him see why Scott basically didn't need him anymore and how he'd actually done a lot of harm to Cyclops over the years. This all went down in X-Men Legacy issue number 216 and also stood to show just how powerful of a telepath Emma Frost truly is. During Executioner's song, a whole X-Men team ended up being taken out by, get this, Wolverine. See what I'm saying? X-Men fighting X-Men. What's going on? Granted, it wasn't the X-Men team, but it was an X-Men adjacent team, so I think we can count it. After taking out Shatterstar, the X-Force team would also be tracked down by Wolverine and taken out primarily by him and by Psylocke, forced to surrender to the Blue X-Men and X-Factor teams respectively, and they were backed into a corner fairly easily, honestly, with Wolverine choosing to hunt them down and citing it as one of the things he is best known for, which honestly, true. Although I imagine X-Force, like the other teams here, also felt pretty conflicted about fighting against their friends. So this, combined with Wolverine's ruthlessness, probably helped to convince them to, maybe just surrender. You've probably heard of a little well-known event called Avengers vs. X-Men. This event stood to highlight some of the feuds, some of the tension between these two teams and their individual members that had been brewing for, honestly, years. Chiefly though, the fight was over the Phoenix Force. The Phoenix was returning to bond with, as the mutants believe, its current ideal host, Hope Summers. At least that was their working theory. They didn't know for sure. The Avengers, because they didn't know for sure what was going on with this, wanted it gone. They felt it was too dangerous. The two fought, which now seems ironic since although the Phoenix has long been linked to mutants and of course mutant-based stories, and the Avengers were very anti-Phoenix at this time, the Avengers also recently had the Phoenix as a member on their team when the Phoenix Force was merged with Echo, aka Maya Lopez.
When it comes to superhero powers, I'm sure we could all list off a few for the mainstream folks. But what about those hidden powers that only pop up every once in a while? While I don't think I've read enough comics yet to know every single power for every single soup ever, I think I managed to wrangle some interesting info for y'all today. Question for you: what superhero ability are you absolutely positive that you're the only one that knows about it? Let me know in the comments and let's test my knowledge together. I thought I knew it all when it came to Superman, but I had my mind absolutely blown today. The Silver Age was a weird time for the Man of Steel. In addition to his usual superpowers of flight, super strength, invulnerability, heat vision, and super breath, writers often gave him a plethora of bizarre powers for individual stories. Whether it was using super muscular control to change his face's appearance, or using his super mind to telepathically control others, the pre-crisis Superman could seemingly do anything. You heard me right, I think it was in Action Comics issue 55 and various Golden Age stories, this guy couldn't just change the shape of his face, but in some cases, his entire body. In early adventures, he used to disguise himself as a disgraced sports player, an alien creature, all of which begs a pretty obvious question. Why on earth would he rely on a pair of nondescript glasses to hide his identity when he could just change his face? That's gonna stick with me. One of his most bizarre powers was the super kiss. Look folks, consent is a beautiful thing, and this is a weird gray area that launched my eyebrows into space faster than you could say kryptonite. Superman first used the super kiss in Action Comics issue 306, when he planted one on Lois Lane so hard it left her dizzy, flushed, and sweating profusely in the middle of the Daily Planet's Christmas party. While the rest of the planet's staff wondered why Lois couldn't suddenly walk, Clark was like, I'm going to congratulate myself on my secret tongue talents. His tonsil hockey talents were then showcased in Superman 2 when he planted a kiss on Lois to make her forget that they had shacked up in the Fortress of Solitude for a couple of weeks. Thankfully, this creepy superpower hasn't been seen since, because I'd be freaking out if it did. Has anyone ever counted how many versions of Wolverine's claws there have been over the years? They're one of the deadliest weapons in the Marvel Universe, and over the course of the character's history, he's seen nearly as many upgrades, alterations, alternate versions, and imitations of his claws as he changes his ever-shifting backstory. Of course, as the saying goes, some Wolverines are more deadly than others. The Fire Claws version of Wolverine, imbued with the powers of Ghost Rider, not only looks amazing, but the idea of being slashed with those flaming claws is legitimately nightmarish. Considering the absolute havoc these claws have the potential to wreak, anyone coming face to face with this iteration of Wolverine is in major peril, including, A lot of folks. While the relative deadliness of some characters versus others can and should be debated, it is inarguable that a Wolverine with claws made of literal burning hellfire is one of the most dangerous creations in comic lore. Also, don't confuse them with his hawk claws, which is a version that glows white and is super hot, and takes the deadliness to an entirely unparalleled level. Aside from being able to cut through anything and everything, this Wolverine would need to do little more than gently poke the average person with even the tip of one of his claws, and it would result in their immediate death. In the same vein as the fire claws, the hawk claws have the edge because while the fire claws could possibly be difficult to be precise with, the hawk claws allow Wolverine to be as meticulous with his kills as ever. Ooh! While we're on the topic of fire, did anybody know that Luke Cage can actually make fire? So ever since the popular show came out on Netflix, we all love him. We first saw him in the Jessica Jones show, then he got his own show, and we were like, heck yes. We know he's superhumanly strong, and being injured doesn't really faze him, but he can create fire. So in one scene we see him walk out of his bar, on fire, he's unharmed, but what we don't see is him being able to rub his hands together, create enough friction, and make flames. Okay, imagine this. If Luke Cage holds, say, a pencil or a stick of wood, then by sliding the wood through his hands, the wood would catch fire because of friction. It's the same premise as cavemen making fire, or how Tom Hanks made it in the movie Castaway. Luke's ability to make fire could have aided him in several situations, or just like, could be fun for a campfire. Okay, either I fell asleep during the Thor movies, or I just somehow completely missed his pet goats? Curse you, MCU, for taking away an element of this character that would only serve to make him more of a Disney princess than he already is. Much of Thor's powers and arsenal come straight out of Norse mythology. There's of course his weapon, and his much more infrequently used belt of strength that temporarily imbues him with even greater strength. Then there's his mystical chariot, which he can instantly summon to travel in between the 9 worlds. The chariot is unique because it's driven by 2 large goats. Both of them have been shown to be extremely intelligent in various comics. Once Odin used the goats to summon reinforcements, while another time they saved Asgard's offspring when the city was attacked by invaders. One mythological aspect that hasn't carried over is that Thor often eats the goats before battle and then resurrects them the following day using Mjolnir. Okay, never mind that comment earlier about Disney princess energy. Eating your own pets is more Disney villain category and super weird. Oh, you know what? I know what I was thinking when I said Disney princess, and somebody forgot to tell me that Wonder Woman can talk to animals. Yes, I know, all her abilities are super cool, but talking to animals is so precious. And we've been robbed of that on screen. Technically, we saw a bit of this during Linda Carter's run as the DC heroine when she was shown speaking with a bird in one episode, and it's been a prominent Wonder Woman ability in the comics as well. So since she's a favorite of Zeus and other gods, these Greek gods granted Diana several superhuman abilities, and among them, the power to communicate with animals. So in the comics, you can see her speaking with like all types of creatures, tigers, lions, you name it. It's unlikely we'll get to see Wonder Woman speak to animals on the big screen anytime soon, since DC is restructuring at the moment, but despite being a rather obscure superpower among fans, it's so cool! Okay, let's move away from the big guys for a moment and focus on a personal favorite hero, or villain depending on your point of view, Homelander. So in the boys comics, his powers include heat vision, super strength, durability, flight, super hearing, and enhanced vocal cords. He also ages more slowly than a normal human thanks to Compound V. He also has X-ray vision, which enables him to see through anything except for stuff that has zinc, which, haha, I see that Superman nod. But in the show, I don't think we've really seen any reference to his enhanced vocal cords yet, or maybe I'm totally having a mind blank. Maybe that's something we can hope for in season 4, since it's almost here. Okay. Back to Marvel we go, with everything you forgot you knew about Captain America. Cap was the 3rd Marvel superhero to be brought into the MCU. Iron Man and Thor both made very strong appearances, but the story of Steve Rogers becoming the big hero he is today was heartwarming to a lot of fans. There is a reason he's my favorite MCU soup, and the only one I've technically cosplayed. Through his trilogy and the Avengers films, we get to see a lot of his abilities like super strength, healing, speed, and more. One thing we don't get a lot of explanation about is his super heightened vision, which enables him to see further, sharper, and more quickly than normal humans. I feel like this really could have come in handy in more than a few instances, but I guess it was too much to translate on screen. One thing we see but don't really realize is that Cap can literally never get tired. He sleeps and everything, but he is totally immune to fatigue, which really helps you understand how he's so on the go during a fight. Yes, it's a little more subtle, but it's totally worth a mention in my opinion. Seeing as Spidey in the MCU is the 3rd time in recent history that the webhead has made it to the big screen, I'm pretty sure people who aren't Marvel fans know the ins and outs of Spider-Man's most basic abilities. Heck, back when I knew next to nothing about superheroes, I could name a few of them. But today I learned about a handful that I'm surprised haven't been brought to the screen more. One thing we're very rarely shown is his ability to communicate with spiders, similar to how Ant-Man communicates with ants. Since he has all their climbing, webbing, and heightened senses, it adds up. I know arachnophobes everywhere just shuddered, and well, I'm right there with ya. Still weird that someone who is a spider in every other sense of the word hasn't really been seen talking to the creepy little buggers. Okay, how about in the comics, Peter actually has premonitions. As someone who is always fighting crime and evil, I'm betting this comes in handy for not being fired at or injured. I think he might have used this ability in Infinity War, which is why he seemed so panicked and knew he was fading away, but I'm not positive. Hey, Kevin Feige, wanna weigh in? Please? Another curious one that I'm surprised isn't used more, his ability to grow extra limbs. He might be able to do a lot, but extra limbs aren't as helpful of a skill as one might think. I don't think this has happened in the MCU, but back in a 1971 comic, Spider-Man one day woke up with 6 limbs. Eventually he was saved with an antidote made by Dr. Kirk Connors, but damn, I think it's safe to assume he didn't go to high school that day. Oh, and before I forget, at one point in the comics, he actually had fangs and even stingers coming out of his hands. Eventually he realized that it was a bit much. Too much spidery and less human, so he was like, okay, we're done. Which, smart move, dude. One lesser known ability about Loki is that the guy can freaking fly. His power of manipulation allows him to levitate, meaning that, technically speaking, he can fly! I'm not sure why he didn't pull this trick out while standing off with Thanos. Come on. Another surprising one, he has super speed abilities. As half frost giant, he has amazingly quick reflexes, thinking abilities, and agility, which means he can probably take down anybody he wants, he just doesn't want to. Ooh, almost forgot. He doesn't look like it with his lean figure, but he has super strength, just like Thor. Okay, he might not be as strong as Thor, but he's still a god and a frost giant, making him far stronger than any mortal human. As a trickster, he uses more of his intellectual powers than brute strength, so we don't get to see him lifting up a car or a building. But he can. Okay, how about I end today with a supervillain just to change things up? Did y'all know that Elektra was able to control minds? Context, Maxwell Dillon was working as an electrical engineer, but when he was repairing a power line, he was struck by lightning, and that transformed him into Electro, one of Spider-Man's most dangerous villains and a member of the Sinister Six. With the ability to create and manipulate electricity, one of his hidden powers is the ability to mind control. Theoretically, since Electro can manipulate electric currents, he is able to control a person's brain by controlling their neurons. Neurons, or nerve cells, are cells in the brain that transmit and process data through electric signals. It's possible that in that attempt, Electro could fry somebody's brain, but if he focuses just right, Electro could easily be confused for a telepath. One of his favorite forms of attacks is to directly electrocute someone with electric energy blasts. But little does he know that the fight could be over without him breaking a single sweat.
Superheroes without powers? What's so super about that? In some ways, I actually think this makes a hero even more super, assuming they can get the job done, of course. Katana is known for being one of the best martial artists over at DC Comics. She is considered a master martial artist and is also extremely skilled in swordsmanship. Typically, she wields a katana, the sword she was trained in and gets her codename from. Her katana is also special, being known as the Soul Taker. It claims the soul of whoever it slays, and she carries it because her husband's soul is actually trapped within it. Sometimes her sword is therefore able to help her in ways that appear mystical, but really Katana herself is not powered. She simply carries a cursed weapon. Next up, Hawkeye. Hawkeye is one of the most gifted marksmen we have in the comics. He is Clint Barton, a man who is known for being a crack shot with a bow and arrow, but has also been shown across multiple stories and realities to be a crack shot with almost any projectile that you put in his hands. It was implied at one point that Clint was so good at this because he had supervision, but I've really only seen it come up once in the comics during Civil War II, and at the time I read it, I kind of chuckled a bit at the idea. In fact, it's not even called supervision, I believe, in the comic. It's just said that he can like see really well. His sight was so good that he was able to see Bruce about to Hulk out while like basically staked out in a tree far away from him, but seeing a change in Bruce's eyes. Yeah, I don't know about that. However, I would believe that Hawkeye's sense of sight, smell, taste, and touch are somewhat enhanced, considering he is often depicted as being mostly deaf. Blue Beetle is another smarty pants in the superhero community, and that's really where his strength comes from as a hero. At least that is how it is for Blue Beetle Ted Kord. Ted Kord is a super genius and built his own Blue Beetle suit from scratch. His successor in the mantle, Jamie Reyes, is also super smart but isn't necessarily a tech whiz, and his suit resembles a beetle as well, but really it's just alien tech. Both rely on their suits a lot to be heroes, and both do a pretty good job of beating up baddies thanks to their suits. Batgirl hails from the Bat family, which makes her one of the most powerful non-powered superheroes in the DC universe. I thought about putting Nightwing on here instead, but I decided against that when I considered that while Nightwing is super intelligent in his own way, especially in a crime lab, Babs has the added bonus of not just being a skilled crime fighter in a physical and strategic sense, but also of having been the person working behind the scenes in her capacity as Oracle. She's also a master hacker. Also, I talk about Nightwing a lot, so I figured it was time to let Babs shine for a bit, hence why she's included here. But let me know, who is your favorite member of the Bat family, and why do you think they're so powerful? What makes them so powerful? Shang-Chi is one of my all-time favorites in the comics when it comes to non-powered heroes. I honestly started to research Shang-Chi when the MCU film Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings was announced, and the more I looked into this character, the more I found there that I really liked. Shang-Chi is a master martial artist who is the son of a villain, who we'd later come to know over time as Zhang Zhu. Currently, his dad is dead in the comics and has been since 2011. We probably won't be seeing him again anytime soon, so for better and for worse. But a lot of the conflict in Shang-Chi's life actually came from his relationship with his dad. Growing up, Shang-Chi lived a very sheltered life and was unaware of his father's role in the world. However, when he was sent out on his first mission, he came to know the truth about his father and finally saw him for the first time as the villain the rest of the world knew him to be. Shang-Chi was faced with a choice: accept this and remain the heir to one of the most powerful and influential men in the world, or leave the only home he'd ever known and give it all up, but rest somewhat easier in regards to his conscience. He chose, of course, the latter, becoming a hero. Shang-Chi is a studied philosopher and insanely skilled martial artist, having been trained since birth. He's actually considered to be one of the best martial artists in the world, and has even learned to tap into his chi, or ki, in a way that makes him sometimes seem superpowered. Though really, chi is available to all to channel, Shang-Chi just knows how to tap into it better than most others. Currently in the comics, likely to reflect his MCU counterparts, Shang-Chi is armed with the 10 rings. But even still, while these do grant him powers, the powers still belong to the item ultimately, not Shang-Chi himself. Also, I personally like Shang-Chi without the 10 rings. That might be a weird thing to say, but hey, I like classic Shang-Chi. He's great too. Some might argue that Iron Fist has powers because he is given the mystical ability of the Iron Fist, but he does also have to kill a dragon to achieve this, so yeah. Or, be given the strength of said dragon, Shao Lao, by choice, as seen with the latest person to take up the mantle. Lin Lai lay dying when the reincarnation of Shao Lao hatched and chose to save Lin's life by granting him the power of the Iron Fist. At the end of the day though, the power of the Iron Fist is still something you must earn in a way, so I suppose because of that, I don't often see it as a superpower. It's more like the most powerful martial arts ability that you can unlock, but like I said, you still have to earn it, and typically when one does this, they are still very much just a person who is good at martial arts. Although if you wanted to get technical, Danny is just Danny right now, but he's still a superhero who you would not want to come across, as he's one of the most powerful martial artists in the whole world. At least you wouldn't want to come across him if you were a villain. If you're also good, then I'm sure it'd be fine. Danny would probably just fist bump you. When it comes to street level heroes, this next one takes the cake as one of the best, and also just honestly one of the coolest. We're talking about Moon Knight. I feel like Moon Knight is often highly underrated, which is also wild when you consider we're in a time when Moon Knight is crushing it in the comic world. Well, not in terms of what he's doing, as he did just die, but more in terms of his series and how well produced and written both have been. Shout out to Alessandro Cappuccio and Jed MacKay. MacKay in general has just been like on fire lately in the comic book world, and if you haven't read Moon Knight or Vengeance of the Moon Knight, you should check those out. Just do yourself a favor. It's a good time. Green Arrow is basically DC's version of Hawkeye, who we talked about earlier on. Or rather, Hawkeye is like Marvel's version of Green Arrow, I should say, since Oliver Queen came first, debuting in the 1940s, whereas Clint wouldn't show up until the 1960s in the comics. Not to say that just because Ollie appeared earlier, he's better than Clint, as obviously I've put him a lot higher on this list, but I would say that in terms of comic book marksman, Green Arrow has made more of a name for himself than Hawkeye has, whether that is because Queen has been around for longer or been considered more popular and therefore has done more while being more prominently featured. It's a little harder to to say. It's probably a combination of both of those things though. Green Arrow is considered to be one of the greatest marksmen on the planet, and has also been implied to be a rival marksman even beyond the planet's boundaries, with him taking some pretty cosmic shots here and there. Usually he gets a bit of an assist. He's gotten an assist before from Green Lantern, but still, it's impressive. Iron Man is one that I always forget about when it comes to lists like these. I don't know why that is. When I first sit down and start brainstorming about who I want to be on my list, Iron Man just always seems to like slip through my mind. Now, I'm not a big Iron Man fan, so I mean, that could be why. But I actually have another theory for this. I think the more likely reason is because Iron Man just seems so super to me. Like, I don't think of him as not having superpowers, even though he really doesn't have any powers. How wild is that? Tony Stark is just a super genius of a man who uses his intellect to build unstoppable weapons. This puts him in a league with other insanely iconic individuals from comics like Batman, who is also known for his genius and his resourcefulness. And, you know, his access to usually unlimited resources, as with Bruce and Tony both, money is not usually an obstacle for them. But yeah. Speaking of money not being an obstacle and Batman, of course, this list would not be complete without the most overpowered, non-powered superhero of all time, Batman. Batman is the king of being powerful without needing to rely on any powers at all. Across stories and continuities, he has used his wits, his skills, and strategies to take down giants. He's faced Darkseid and survived. He's fought against Superman and won, or almost won, depending on the story and the continuity that we're talking about, and also your interpretation of some of those stories. Batman is just a man, but the plot armor he wears, along with his skill set, his determination, and often his fortune, gives him the ability to take down almost any foe, superpowered. What makes a detective great? Their deductive reasoning, their ability to access any place or person, their overall intelligence? Or is it their ability to turn on detective mode at any time? Detective Chimp has to be hands down one of the most powerful detectives around. What makes him so great? Probably his intellect. Detective Chimp is Bobo T. Chimpanzee. And while you might be thinking it's wild that I included a chimpanzee on my list, this isn't just any chimpanzee. Also, this is comics, and for a while there, monkeys and apes sold big time. So primates are a weirdly large part of our comic book history overall, Bobo included. Bobo was given the abilities to understand and communicate with all animals, in addition to super genius intelligence and, I believe, eternal youth by the Fountain of Youth. That's right, the Fountain of Youth. So while he doesn't have super strength or the ability to fly around, Detective Chimp is still considered to have superpowers of a kind, and he often uses those powers, his smarts, to solve some of the most challenging detective cases. Oh yeah, and he's even dabbled in the realm of the mystic as well. Next up, it seems like Luke Cage has a thing for amazing lady detectives because he dates Misty, but also later ends up married to Jessica Jones, who has also become known for her sleuthing abilities in the comics. If you don't know Jessica Jones, she initially started out as a superhero going by the name of Jewel. She had the superpower of super strength and she can also fly, but eventually she fell under the influence of Purple Man and was only freed from her brainwashing when she was forced to fight against the Avengers. This experience changed her, and while dealing with her trauma surrounding these events, she decided to help people in a more grounded way as a detective instead of as a super. This next entry from DC never gets enough love in the comics or in videos like this, which is why I'm excited to include him here. Who is Harvey Bullock? He is a good friend of Commissioner Jim Gordon and his former partner, depending on the continuity, but I digress. For many people, Harvey Bullock is a much beloved and underrated character in the Batman universe. Many also consider him to be one of the bravest characters in the Gotham television series as well, at least initially. In that show, he ends up being a straight and narrow cop who, I believe, turns out to be corrupted. But in the comics, he was a cop who wanted to go straight and narrow, but saw the system was broken and ended up acting corrupt, only to team up with Jim Gordon, his partner, later on, to redeem the system. Because he didn't like that it was corrupt, he just didn't know any way to fix it. Gordon came along and they did it together. While Gordon has moved up with the GCPD considerably throughout his career, Bullock is basically a lifetime police detective and acts as a foil for Gordon's confidence in Batman, often playing the skeptic about whether or not Batman can truly help the city. While DC seemingly has monopoly on most of the smartest and greatest detective comics, being themselves a comic publisher who's of course named after their flagship series, Detective Comics, DC, Marvel definitely has some characters who have become iconic for their investigative abilities. One of those amazing detectives is, of course, Misty Knight. Man, people often know Misty Knight as one half of the Daughters of the Dragon team, known for her master martial arts skills. And while, yes, this is also true, she started out working as a police officer and later in her life would also go independent, working as a private investigator. I would say one of Misty's greatest strengths as a detective is all of her connections. She knows a lot of people, both in terms of law enforcement and in the vigilante world. So when it comes to doing some digging or getting a powerful ally, she has a ton of resources at her fingertips. I mean, she even has X-Men connections thanks to her being Jean Grey's roommate at one point, so she just knows everyone. As with many of the greatest detectives in DC Comics, this next hero to be included on our list has been compared to Batman in the past, in terms of his own level of deductive reasoning. We're talking here about Elongated Man. Elongated Man is Ralph Dibny, and his wife Sue also often worked alongside him to solve mysteries the world over. Even when they both died, this didn't even stop them, with Ralph becoming a ghost detective alongside his wife. Short-lived period, but something I would have loved to see like a whole series of. Just them solving mysteries, solving cases as ghost detectives together. So cute. One of the greatest detectives in a potential future is Green Lantern Joe Moline. Sojourner also happens to be my favorite Green Lantern thanks to the series Far Sector, and anytime I have an opportunity, of course, to include her on a list, you know I'm gonna do it because that's how much I love her. Hence this entry. But she's here, of course, for a reason, like I said. During the now Elseworld, but at one point potential future of Future State, it was stated that Green Lantern Moline had actually become known not simply as the greatest detective in one city, or even the world, or even like her own sector of the galaxy, but instead the greatest detective in the universe. This is a pretty big claim, and while Jo hasn't achieved this status just yet, I feel she has proven through her early adventures in Far Sector that she has great potential. She was thrown into basically an interstellar civil war where deep-seated secrets had to be uncovered for her to address civil unrest between two different alien species who were like cohabitating on the planet, and ended up finding a way to solve the case, save the day, and in the end prevent the planet from breaking out into a full-on war. They initially started to fight, but Jo was actually shortly after able to put a stop to this, all thanks to basically her detective skills really. Well, of course that and her power ring. From space back to Earth, Renee Montoya is one of the best, though likely not the best detective in Gotham City. She's one of the few people in comics who was able to deduce the true identity of Batman. She's not just great at investigating, but she also is good at escaping and fighting, which also helps her to solve her cases, allowing her to get out of situations she may have gotten into through her investigating. She's also risen in the ranks, both within the Gotham City Police Department and as a vigilante, moving up to detective of major crimes in the New Earth continuity, and in the Prime Earth continuity, she also ended up accepting a promotion to commissioner in Gotham from Mayor Nakano, replacing the man who once trained her, Harvey Bullock. Now, when it comes to those who are good at solving mysteries, sometimes you have to turn to a mysterious figure for that. A figure who sometimes you need mystery to solve a mystery, you know what I mean? Which is where the question comes in. Who is he? That was initially a big part of his mystery as a character, and in the modern day, still is. However, the most well-known version of this character is probably Vic Sage. If you thought Renee Montoya was a great detective, this is actually the person who also helped to train her. Renee worked with the question for a while before eventually taking up the mantle herself in Sage's place. While Renee worked as a detective for the GCPD as a civilian, Sage in his civilian life was a journalist, which lends well also to his skill set. He is said to be the second greatest detective in the world, but for me, I would say it's a tie between him and Detective Chimp. Speaking of world's greatest detectives, well, Multiple Man himself is known for his detective skills as well, somewhat. There was actually a version of him that was supposedly the world's greatest detective over at Marvel Comics. Well, not actually Jamie, this dupe was a version of him, a duplicate as per his mutant powers. That is what Jamie Madrox's mutant powers are. He can create duplicates of himself, and when reabsorbed, he gets to take in their knowledge and their skills. This means that Jamie is probably one of the the smartest and most capable people in the entire world in Marvel Comics, thanks to all the duplicates he's created and all the lives that they have lived, and then he's absorbed those, so he has all that knowledge within him and all those skills. This particular dupe, the one who was supposedly the world's greatest detective, basically decided to not absorb back into Jamie and chose instead to sacrifice his life rather than to pass on all his knowledge and all the secrets he'd acquired to the original. This was because he actually felt, I guess, all the knowledge like really messed him up, and I don't think he wanted to burden Jamie with it, but also I think he thought the fact that Jamie creates duplicates to send them out into the world to live all this stuff, and then sometimes it's terrible, is pretty awful in and of itself, which kinda true. Batman is hands down one of the best detectives we have in comic book history. Like overall, like we're not just talking DC, we're not just talking Marvel, I'm talking all of comics. He is known as the world's greatest detective at DC Comics. That being said, he's had some stiff competition over the years, but when it comes to the most iconic and often most capable detective we have in the comics, Batman still, I would say, has to take the top spot. I mean, Batman made his first appearance in Detective Comics. When we think of comics and detectives, he is the person we think of first. And it isn't even like this is just a title for him. Batman has also earned his rep as one of the greatest detectives of all time. He's trained with some of the best in the world, and he has proven time and time again to be unstoppable thanks to his observation skills, allowing him to be multiple steps ahead of his enemies, even when they think, wrongfully, that they've pulled the wool over his eyes. Spoiler alert, if you think you've done that, you probably haven't.
Many superpowers are just like magic, and some heroes take it a step further. They disappear. Lionheart hasn't been seen since his cameo in 2008's Trinity Volume 1 Issue 24. He's actually only appeared about 19 times in total. His first appearance in 1993 is in Bloody London. For real, he is just a guy, he was a dock worker, and he has no powers or anything like that, unless you count him being super loyal and super brave. These two traits in particular made him the ideal candidate to defend England as part of a government operative. His impressive lineage was a bonus. He is a direct descendant of King Richard I of England, also known as Richard the Lionheart. Modern Lionheart's civilian name is Richard Plant. We know where the Richard and Lionheart came from, but his last name is from the royal house King Richard was in. He's super English. Lionheart's supersuit is a suit of armor with a big blazing energy sword. The armor lets Richard fly and makes him extra strong, but not strong enough to defeat aliens apparently, at least not at first. Joining up with the Justice League, they fought a bunch of alien parasites that were making London's rivers run red. This entire plot was called Bloodlines, and it will come back. Lionheart did get bitten by an alien, tragic, but he lived and continued to fight another day, still teaming up with the Justice League in the future. During the whole Bloodlines thing, most people who survived alien bites got powers, but it doesn't look like that happened to Lionheart. Did you know that being annoying is not only a talent, but also a superpower? The Heckler is the best at it. His special power is the ability to annoy anybody, which is true. It's annoying how he randomly appears and then disappears forever. His last appearance was more recent. He was in the 2021 series One Star Squadron. It was only about 6 issues, but it was a lot of fun. The Heckler is part of a team of heroes who could make these lists. They are basically on-call superheroes. You use their on-demand hero app to order. The Heckler is just funny. Everything about him. His creator, Keith Giffen, created him in the first place because he wanted to work with Bugs Bunny, but felt that it wouldn't be approved, so he made a superhero Bugs Bunny. Like Bugs, the Heckler essentially makes his opponents destroy themselves through smart mouth comments and pointed insults. In issue 3 of his 6-issue series, they invented a new zodiac sign for him, Heckalarious. If you were born between Pisces and Aries on a leap year, then you are actually Heckalarious. That means you're bright, mirthful, and mischievous. This isn't important, I just think it's funny and relevant because it's a leap year this year. The Heckler's civilian identity is Stuart Mosley, the awkward owner of Skid Row Diner Eats. The Heckler has been in about 14 or 15 comics. He was supposed to get one more, but the 7th Heckler comic never made it to print. That's all, folks. Argus is the name of a few different DC things, the most popular being a US government agency, but the lesser known Argus is Nick Kovac. The US government knows him as Nick Kelly for all the right reasons though. After his father passed, Nick joined the army as Nick Kelly, proving himself capable. He later joined the FBI. Eventually, he had a run-in with an alien, much like our guy Lionheart, and was bit, but he got superpowers. The powers included the regular stuff like extra strength and speed and reflexes, but he also got enhanced vision and invisibility. In Greek mythology, Argus was a giant with 100 eyes, so it's thought that Nick drew inspo from this when he was choosing his hero name. His enhanced vision is very enhanced. He can see ultraviolet, radio waves, x-ray, infrared if you're lying through illusions, and slightly see the future, which is kind of wild. He's teamed up with the Flash to defeat an evil robot. Much to his displeasure, he doesn't like the Flash. Argus has had his fair share of hero trauma. At one point he had his eyes removed, which would be awful for anyone, but if your entire power set is based on your ability to see, that's extra not good. He did get them back though. The last time we saw Argus was in the 2009's Faces of Evil Prometheus 1, and he was in a team of 3. Fortunately, our guy survived, but one team member didn't, and he hasn't been seen since. Yet another victim of the alien snacking habits is Joe Public. He was a regular Gotham City gym teacher who deeply cared for his students and wanted to see them succeed. When one of his students passed due to a bad, colorful set of pills, he decided to track down the dealer. He knew it was someone called Happy Jack, and the good news is, so did Batman. During the hunt is when Joe and Happy Jack were attacked by the hungry alien. Joe survived, Jack didn't. His power was the ability to absorb the strength and energy of what's around him, but he has to stay near the person or he will lose the power. Him and Batman defeated the alien that bit Joe, and Joe fully stepped into a life of heroics after. He continued to partner with Batman on occasion, one time taking down Corrosive Man. Joe, to my understanding, is just Joe. He is face out, only sunglasses for his eyes, real name is his super name, which is rare. In 1996 is his last appearance and mention. He appears as a hallucination in Batman Shadow of the Bat issue 50, and then in issue 53 he is mentioned by another character to be a friendly vigilante, which implies that he is still out on the town fighting crime. Technically, this next guy did disappear because he moved 6 feet under, but he's so funny I could not let him slip under the radar. His name is Defenestrator, from now on Mr. D. He was a member of Super Squad Section 8. He did start as a bit of a bad guy. He went to Arkham Asylum for attacking an officer, but he was reformed and joined the hero team, which is great. We never get the chance to learn his real name because unfortunately Mr. D gets caught in a crossfire and doesn't make it. His first appearance was in Hitman 18 in 1997, and it was only 3 years later, in issue 52, that he was gone forever. Now the reason this man has made this list is because his method of fighting is maybe my favorite I've ever seen. He carries a window around and smashes it on the enemy's head, and I can't figure out if the window is a magic window that regenerates after each hit, or if he smashes it and then has to go get another window from somewhere. I think it's regenerating because in issue 52 in the beginning of the battle it gets blown up, but the next window he uses looks exactly like the first window, and he wouldn't have had time to get another window the next time he uses a window. A case could also be made for the windows being held in his massive square looking suit jacket. Either way, this guy is hilarious and I hope he gets revived. Winona Littlebird, better known as Owlwoman, has been MIA since her appearance in 2006's Infinite Crisis 7. Fitting, honestly, considering she debuted in the 1986 comic Crisis on Infinite Earths 12. Went in with an Infinite Crisis, went out with an Infinite Crisis. So while I would like to see her again, it's kind of a full circle moment. She is a Native American hero. Her powers include heightened senses, and like an owl, she can see in the dark. She can fly using wind currents and later received some claws. Owlwoman was part of the Global Guardians, fighting alongside members of the Justice League until the team disbanded due to a lack of funding. Unfortunately, though she started out as a hero, she got brainwashed after the Guardians ended by someone named Queen Bee. Queen Bee was the one who gave her the claws, and her plan was to take over the world. Original. Eventually, the brainwashing was reversed, and Owlwoman went on to fighting crime again, even teaming up with Wonder Woman. I love this next kid because there are too many examples of heroes applying for a super squad and then not getting in, and then turning into a villain because their feelings got hurt. But Color Kid, he took rejection like a champ, and he didn't let that stop him from continuing to be a hero. He started out as a lab assistant, just a regular kid, and then was struck by a multicolored light beam from another dimension, average DC experience. The light beam gave him the power to change the color of any object. Excited by his new abilities, he traveled to Earth to audition for the Legion of Superheroes. Unfortunately, his powers, while cool, don't have much use when it comes to fighting crime, so he was rejected. Joke's on them though, one time his powers came in very useful when he changed a kryptonite cloud from green to blue, changing its chemical nature in the process, which meant it wasn't harmful to Superman anymore. He later developed the ability to camouflage himself and even create a sort of fog around people by changing the color of the air around them. So please give my guy some credit. He was a member of the Legion of Substitute Heroes for a while, which is basically made up of a bunch of people rejected from the first Legion. His last comic appearance was in 1994, and he was featured on the animated TV show Legion of Superheroes, which ended in 2008. Latino hero Bushmaster is all about the reptiles and fighting crime. He's teamed up with the likes of Batman and Robin and been a part of the Global Guardians too. His civilian name is Bernal Rojas. He has no superpowers but is very intelligent. He started out as a world-renowned Venezuelan lizard scientist, so he's always been into reptiles. He brought this into his crime-fighting work by creating reptile-themed gadgets. To list a few, because I think they're neat: chameleonic camouflage, terrapin shell, and flying lizard wings, and more. During his time on the Global Guardians, he was also brainwashed, sad, but it's only a few battles later that he's back to himself. The really sad part is once he and the other Guardians parted ways, they are attacked and he doesn't make it. How could they do this to my guy? It happened in 1994's Justice League Quarterly issue 17. He was around about 8 years before his departure, debuting in 1987's Infinity Inc. 34. There may even be a second Bushmaster somewhere out there. In Final Crisis, a new guy is seen in the outfit running around, but we don't know anything about him, so keep an eye out for Bushmaster Part 2. Crimson Fox is pretty unique. There have been 3 people to take up the name, and yet only 2 versions of the hero. The original first Crimson Fox was a pair of twins, Vivian and Constance. Their parents were killed by a pharmaceutical company. Vowing revenge, the sisters started a rival company and became the Crimson Fox. There was one problem: their company did so well, it put the other one out of business, meaning the sisters were now very public figures. They didn't want it to seem odd if a public figure disappeared every time a hero appeared, so they decided to fake one twin's death so they could be CEO while the other fights. The sisters drew straws to see who would have to fake their death, which is just something that I can see sisters doing. Their main power was pheromone control. They debuted in Justice League Europe in 1989, joining the Justice League of Europe. Unfortunately, Vivian passed while on a mission in 1995, and Constance followed in 1998. Years later, in 2006, another Crimson Fox appears and claims to have inherited the twins' fortune. We just don't know how. She's got all the abilities that the twins had, and she's doing it basically how the twins did, so I say we let her keep going. Online, it lists her final appearance as Checkmate Volume 2, Issue 31, but in the comics, she's seen getting back up after the fight in there, so where did you go, girl? Crimson Fox has also been in 2 TV shows. The first was in the animated show Justice League Unlimited in 2006, and the next was in the 2017 live-action show Powerless. Powerless would have been the last time a version of Crimson Fox was seen. A son of Superman and Wonder Woman is a big deal, so where did he go? Jonathan Kent II was born to the famous heroes in the reality we know as the Kingdom. He first appeared in 1996 in Kingdom Come 4. It's important to say that there are other Jonathan Kents. They are Superman's kids, but with other people in other universes, but this ain't about them. Today's Jonathan has got his parents' powers plus some bonus features. He can travel through time and between dimensions. The Hyper-Time time manipulation is where he took the inspiration for his name, Hyperman. He seems like he would be a big deal, but he's only had about 5 appearances. That could have something to do with his life story. He was kidnapped as a child from his reality and brought to the main reality by a villain wanting to destroy Superman. His parents and Batman eventually rescued the baby, but he disappeared. Turns out the evil guy had reached Hyper-Time on his way there, so Jonathan slipped back in where he was watched by himself, an older version of himself, the Guardian of Hyper-Time. When everything settled, the baby was returned to his parents so he could grow up to be the Guardian hero in the future. That was in Justice Society of America Volume 3, Issue 22 in 2009, and that's all for him, I guess.